The F-16 currently engaged in combat in multiple places throughout the world. It's just a reliable airplane, very inexpensive to fly, and very easy to employ. It was built to counter the MiG-21, and today it's the workhorse in multiple air forces around the world. And as you can see, it's not just a capable airplane, but it's a beautiful airplane. Today carries so many different weapons it's hard to list because of the ability to integrate complex weapon systems into the airplane. There's just about no weapon it can't carry. It's a small airplane, so there are some weapons that are actually almost bigger than the airplane that it can't carry. Very small footprint. You can park a lot of them in a small place. Most of the things you need to access are easy to see by both the maintainers and the pilot, so pre-flight and through flight are simple. Configuration you're looking at, centerline tank, is often used in training because that centerline tank will get you out to the area and enable you to get the work done you need to do, whether it's air to air or air to ground. Single engine slides in and out, very simple, can be measured in hours. Engine is very reliable. You slide that baby out, slide a new one back in, and have the airplane ready to go. Most airplanes try to keep the engine phase time and the aircraft phase time matched. Sometimes you don't, but that's okay because of the ease of change. If you have a picture of the airplane without an engine, you can really tell that it's an engine with an airplane built around it. It's a good sized motor. Today's airplanes, we're into the Block 60 in the United Arab Emirates, Block 30s and onward are flying. They're all just great airplanes. Real nice view of the F-16 in flight. You see the 20mm cannon and you're getting a good view of the overall cross-section of the airplane. Notice how high the bubble canopy sticks up. That caused a stability problem, so the back of the airplane you had to increase the size of the tail because you obviously have to have more surface area aft of the center of gravity than you do in front. So they put a bigger tail on the airplane, and then they said, whoa, the tail's too big, can't get it into any aircraft shelter, so you shrunk the tail and then you put the strakes on the back. You see the strakes sticking out the bottom of the airplane. Some people say it's the reason the canopy was made smaller, and it's the reason the seat was leaned back so you could have stability around the correct axis on the airplane. True or not, who cares? You're sitting back in the seat, the airplane looks good, the tail's not too tall. Originally the airplane was designed with twin tails, much like the Hornet, but there was structural issues apparently, and they ended up one tail, one engine, but they had to put the two strakes on the bottom. Those are actually just separate panels. The whole strake comes off with a bunch of Zeus fasteners. It's very easy to take on and off. Very good view of the cranked arrow wing. Notice how the wing comes in and then it moves forward. That actually produces a lot of lift. If you see it at very high angles of attack and moist conditions, the contrails are coming off right next to the fuselage. Again, 70s technology that was way out in front of the rest of the world at the time and made the F-16 one of the most maneuverable airplanes of its time. Flight control computers, programs that go into the flight controls, what the stabilizer does, what the leading edge and the trailing edge flaps, etc. does, those programs have been upgraded. But the basic aerodynamic design of the airplane is pretty old. If you look at modern airplanes like the Eurofighter and the F-22, you can see some pretty significant advances in aerodynamic design of the airplane. Good view of the back seat and the multifunction displays. Again, you can have them show whatever you want. In this case, it's got the radar and some kind of a weapons page up, the round dial showing your airspeed and your altitude, and that's the radar warning receiver. The F-16 is designed so the backseater can fly it too, so not only does it have the primary flight instruments, but also has the primary flight controls. That's not true of all airplanes. Navy conceptually makes the backseater a backseater, and he doesn't have the controls necessary to fly the airplane. The F-15E as well, although the backseater has a lot of work to do, he also has a stick and a throttle, should he or she need it. The F-16 two-seater was designed as a trainer. The concept, at least when the U.S. Air Force bought them, was two-seaters per squadron. When we had the F-16A, the B model was the two-seater. The F-16C, the D model, is the two-seater. The cost of the back seat is about 1,300 pounds of gas. So the airplane frame is the same. It's the same airplane. You put another seat in it, you gave away that gas tank is really what it is. Two people versus one person, the discussion on that is endless. There's nothing like flying a single-seat fighter, period. However, with the environment that you fly in today, with the weapons, with the capabilities, with the data links, there is a lot of information that goes by you very fast. Had the opportunity in Afghanistan to fly in mixed formations with F-15Es, and they had backseaters, and the awareness and the overall advantage to having that third person amongst two airplanes that wasn't responsible for flying was very advantageous. Where's the tanker? Where's the target set? What's the current intel update? There were many situations where we're engaged, digging out targets, supporting the ground fact, look down, don't have any gas, phase 1 Bravo, snap to the tanker, 27030, climb to 20,000 feet, that fast. Whereas I would have had to come up, got my awareness about me, remember where the tanker track that I used was, not that I couldn't, but knowing that that guy's job was to keep aware of the tanker, it's useful. So 1 seat versus 2 seat. Single seat fighter, there's nothing better. You have autonomy. There's only one person in the committee to make decisions, but there are advantages to 2 seat fighters, big advantages. For example, the F-22 is a single seat fighter, right? It's air to air, but holy smokes, that airplane is doing a lot of work for you. It's processing a lot of information, a lot of data, turning the information for your benefit. So I'm a single seat guy, and if some of my single seat colleagues were here, they'd throw things at me. But having been in combat multiple times, a 4-ship where 2 of them were F-15Es and 2 of them were F-16s, there are many positives to having 6 people in the fight versus 4 people, especially when it's well briefed and well trained. Very effective speed brakes on the F-16, both sides that go up and down, and they're right on the axis of the airplane in line with the thrust line. So unlike some airplanes, speed brakes cause a pitch vector. In the F-16, all they do is slow you down. Very effective. Speed brakes are needed for many things, keeping the power up and slowing down and rejoin, or just slowing down if you need to slow down for whatever reason. This guy looks like we're getting a view out the side during landing. Leading edge flap says, oh, you've landed, therefore you don't want to have any more lift. Why don't I come up? He's got a drag chute out as well. Some F-16s have drag chutes, some don't. But again, the automatic controlled leading edge flap, you saw that as soon as there was weight on the main wheels, those leading edge flaps went right to neutral and took all the lift off the wings. Got a young pilot, looks like he's coming out to his airplane to do the pre-flight. That's the way you see the airplane normally. There's a ladder on it. The ladder is not part of the airplane, obviously, so it has to be put on. You can jump out of it if you need to. He's going around, he's checking the various positions. Basically, the airplane is a pilot and maintenance-friendly airplane. You can see that everything he's looking at, he's only bent over once. He's got to bend over just slightly to look down that big old intake where it breathes, and he's going around and basically making sure that everything's secure. Normal step time prior, you can brief and step to your airplanes, depending on, of course, how far they are away. In 15-20 minutes, get your walk around done, check the maintenance forms to make sure that it's correct. Probably ought to spend time with your crew chief, because All of us know that the key to combat air power is a combat-ready airplane, and the key to a combat-ready airplane is a great crew chief and great maintenance. Without it, you're a pilot, and a pilot without an airplane is really nothing. Young man is going around the back. He's checking various panels and ports in the back of the airplane. He'll look down the back of the engine to make sure the afterburner spray bars and the, we call them the feathers, the afterburner feathers on the can are functional and move. They're moved by hydraulic fluid, but they should be loose while you're there. He wants to make sure that all control surfaces are intact. The back of the airplane, it's a stabilator is the way the airplane flies. The whole surface moves in the back independent of one another. So stabilator, it's a stabilizer and an elevator combined. And you want to make sure that it's lined up correctly while it's sitting there. This configuration has two 370-gallon tanks on it. That's normally what we'd call an air-to-ground configuration or an intercept configuration. Because of the tanks, the airplane does have a G limit, and it does change the handling characteristics of the airplane. But the tanks give you a significant amount of extra fuel and therefore endurance time in flight. So it is often a good way to fly, especially if you want to get a lot of good training. In this configuration, he could go up and they could do intercepts. They could do dissimilar combat training, but they'd have limited maneuvering. You're still able to pull up to 6 Gs, and you're still able to just about beat any third or fourth generation airplane up there. Now, if you're going to go against a Eurofighter or a F-22 or something like that, you probably don't want those tanks on there. But without those tanks, she's only going to fly for about an hour. With the tanks, he's looking at probably about an hour and 30 to an hour and 45 minute sortie, depending on where he's going. If he wanted to cruise, he could probably fly for upwards of 2 hours unrefueled. That said, the airplane is air refuelable, so there is no limit to the length of time it can fly. Today, as we sit here, it's July 2011. There's F-16s of all shapes and sizes flying in and out of Libya. They're in a 2-tank configuration carrying weapons and pods, and their sorties are lasting between 3 and 4 hours with one refueling. This young man gets in the airplane, he straps himself in. The airplane is extraordinarily easy to pre-flight. There's just a couple of absolute switches you need to make sure you're in the right place for safety. Most of us have a checklist that's abbreviated, but all of us make sure we get all the checklist items and get all the switches in the proper position. The helmet today looks standard, but what he's got on, the mask will force air down his lungs. It'll pressure breathe at, I think it's through about 4.5 Gs, so the mask has positive pressure on it. And then to hold the mask on your face, the back of your helmet inflates. There's a balloon in the back of your helmet, so basically your head gets crushed, but you want that because you don't want leaks around the nose and mouth areas. He's also wearing a G suit that provides positive air pressure in the lower part of your body to keep the blood in your head during high G maneuvers. And he's also wearing what's called a combat edge vest, and that's a vest that goes around your midsection that you also plug into the airplane, and again, it has positive air pressure that's monitored and sent into the suit depending on the Gs that the airplane's pulling. So not only is the airplane better than you in capability, it's also taking care of you while you're flying. You wear a harness that you strap on, you want it tight. The seat is a 0-0 seat, and you actually strap yourself into the seat. So if you had to eject, heaven forbid, but it happens, you're strapped to the seat and the harness takes care of you and keeps you safe because both the drogue chute and the actual parachute are in the seat itself. You go through your checklist, make sure it's good. You make sure the crew chief has checked the intake and that the air is clear. You start the airplane. Airplane's very easy to start. The jet fuel sider comes on. It basically creates air, blows it through the engine, and gets the engine twisting. You add gas to that, off she goes. Engine starts itself. Basically, it self-monitors. It keeps track. You watch some parameters to make sure the oil pressure comes up, that the temperature in the turbine doesn't get too hot, and normally she starts fine. If she's too hot, you shut her down and give it another shot if you didn't hurt it. If not, there's something wrong with it. But very, very reliable engine to start. So you get it running. You then have a series of switches that you turn on to bring the avionics up and to get the inertial navigation system and the global positioning system going, because as a single-seat fighter pilot, you don't have a navigator. You really like it when the airplane's smarter than you. So it knows where it is, it knows where it's going, it knows when it's going to get there. So the airplane comes up. Then it goes through a series of self-checks. It's checking its motor, it checks its radars, it pretty much self-checks everything. Major self-check that you have to participate in and the crew chief participates in as well as the flight control check. But again, it's a couple switches you throw, and there they go. You watch the hydraulic pressure to make sure it's up, to make sure they all go the right way. And then you're pretty much ready to taxi. I usually like to check the flight controls myself, just to make sure that if I asked it to go up, it in fact gives the right commands to go up. It's just self-assuring for me to know that. Taxiing the airplane is also fascinating because the airplane has so much goddamn thrust. In idle, you're riding the brakes, especially on a cool day. They've tried to fix that, and when the airplane's in idle, the nozzles open up all the way. Does it help? No. You still have to ride the brakes. Coming down the runway, you have a last chance check. If you're full of live weapons, that's where they pull the safety pins, etc. And then they inspect. Last chance, are you leaking oil? Are your tires good? Do the brakes look good? Is your panels all secure? Does the airplane overall just look good? And that's your last chance check at the end of the runway. You'd be surprised how often you catch things there, like remove before flight pins. Sometimes it just happens, and it's a good thing to do. They spent a lot of time in the F-16 building the airplane so that it fit you when you got in it. Really what happens when you climb in the F-16 and you start flying it, it took me, no kidding, probably about 5 minutes to have the emotion, why aren't all airplanes like this? It fits you perfectly. Your right arm falls on a rest and your right hand grabs the throttle. It's the exact right position. The buttons are exactly right where they need to be for your thumb and 3 of your fingers. You take your left hand and you put it on the throttle. Now your hands are out of your lap, they're split. So you put your hand on the throttle, there's multiple buttons on the throttle, and again, you go, why hasn't every airplane ever built have a throttle like this? There's buttons on it, they make sense, they're where they're supposed to be, they move, the feel of the buttons are correct, and then when you're in that position, it's HOTAS, hands on throttle and stick. It's really the first airplanes to do that. Side stick control, fly-by-wire. The whole between your shoulders environment is now available to you for 2 beautiful multifunction displays. Today they're in color. And then all the other instruments you need to fly the airplane. So you're not encumbered by having to look around your arm or around your body. Environmentally, the cockpit is spectacular. It's very well cooled and heated, so you'll see whether you're in the Kuwaiti desert or whether you're in Alaska in the wintertime, the first thing the pilot does after he starts the engine is close that lid to get that environmental control system operating so that the temperature and the environment inside the cockpit is suitable for a human. That's not true of all airplanes. You see F-4s, A-7s, etc. They taxi around with their canopies open, and the reason is because they need to be open to help the environment inside the cockpit. Get out on the runway, get the thing pointed down the runway, you take a look at the motor, make sure it's right. Sometimes you stop, sometimes you don't. Get it lined up, get your takeoff clearance, you take the motor and you put it up to full mil power, and that's where he is. It looks like he's lighting the afterburner now. When you light the, ooh, there it is. afterburner lights, it throws you back in the seat, and you're airborne really quickly. There's a ton of thrust. Nose come up, off she flies. You better get the gear up fast. You can overspeed it, so there's the gear up, and you're off. Airplane, again, is easy to fly. Taking off and landing is no problem. The position of your body in the airplane is slightly tipped aft. There's some people that say that was by design. There's some people that think that if you sat upright in the airplane, the canopy would be too tall and made it unstable around one of its axes. Who cares the reason? It's really nice tipped back. It's very comfortable. The other thing that's just beyond belief is the canopy rails themselves are very low, and the canopy is a bubble. So you really do not feel like you're sitting in an airplane. You're sitting on an airplane, and then while you're flying, you forget that you're on an airplane. You and it become one. I mean, really become one. You want to brake left. You're not even consciously operating the controls. You may consciously push the power up because you're worried about energy, but your hand just, rotates the airplane to the left, pulls back on the stick, and there you are at 8.5, 9 Gs because you thought it. The F-16 is one of the first airplanes in the world that actually itself is better than the pilot. The earlier generation airplanes, you could fly a mission and physiologically, mentally, you were better than the airplane. The F-16 is really the first airplane in the modern fleet that is better than the human being. It can pull more Gs, it has more capability than your mind can manage, it has tremendous computer capability, it's fly-by-wire, so you end up being a jack of all trades, master of none. But when it's time to focus, you focus on the mission that you're going to get ready to go do, and you become a master of that mission, whether it's air to ground, air to air, whether it's suppression of enemy air defenses, etc. You get good at it. That's called the upfront controls. You can basically do all your admin tasks from right there. Across the top you have the radio buttons, COM1, COM2, HF, list, and then you have the air-to-air and the air-to-ground buttons, so you can just, with one stroke of a button, boom, put in the air-to-air mode, or another stroke of a button, put it in the air-to-ground mode. The wheels are intensity levels and brightness levels. There's 3 switches across the bottom. There's the one on the far right, which has to do with FLIR and autopilot, not used much. Then there's the drift cutout switch. Some people use it, some people don't. But the next switch over is the greatest switch. It's called the dauber. I don't know what its actual name is, but when you get up there and you're in a fight or you're working hard and you're moving with your thumb and you completely mess it up, you just dauber left and it fixes everything. It's like Control-Alt-Delete. You just dauber left and it goes right back to where you were, so you can't mess up inputting through the upfront controls because of that switch. It's a great switch. This looks like he's setting up for a situation where he's simulating a loss of engine, and you want to maintain your energy. You like to have, I forget the numbers exactly, but you like to have about 8,000 feet within about 10 miles of runway at 300 knots. So in this case, he looks like he's has all the energy he needs. The airplane, you can put into a slip, full aileron, full rudder, and basically fly down sideways. And you actually crack the speed brakes a little bit to simulate, no kidding, an airplane that doesn't have any thrust. Because again, in idle, the airplane's putting out quite a bit of thrust. He's got a pretty good slip going. Never want to give away your energy too early though, because if you don't have a motor, you obviously can't get the energy back. But down he comes, he's coming down fast. Getting a good view out the side of the airplane. You can see that he's moving along. He's also descending very rapidly. There's a good view of the runway. He's got it made. In fact, he does have too much energy, so he needs to figure out how to get rid of it. Nice approach. Easily made the runway. One of the things you do in a simulated flame-out approach is you park the airplane in idle and it's there for about a minute. One of the things you have to do is you have to do an engine check to make sure that in fact it's still working. And that's what he did there, and he ended up going around. F-16 endurance and range is fairly good, but with air-to-air refueling and the capability of the engine, it's basically unlimited. And again, the limiting factor is the pilot. It's not the airplane. I've flown missions upwards of 13.5 hours from places like Kuwait to Afghanistan and back again, and the airplane beats you. You know, you get out of the airplane and you're tired and you're sore and you're cramped, and the airplane just sits there and says, "Okay, I'm ready to go again." Okay, here he is setting up final. The F-16 is just a great airplane in the traffic pattern. You put the gear handle down, it then realizes you probably want to land because the gear's down. It configures itself, it changes the way the controls respond to you. You fly down at about 12 to 13 degrees angle of attack. You just hold the picture. You're really just a voting member in the equation. You've put the gear handle down, you've slowed down, and you're steering it to the runway and you're holding the angle of attack. The flight control computers really pretty much take over and say, "Okay, I understand, you want to land, so here we go." And she just lands. There he is crossing the overrun. Carrying the power nicely. Power comes to idle. He's holding it, holding it, holding it. Boom, there she is on landing. Firm landing, that's nice. Airplane likes it. Nice aero brake. Nose comes down around 100 knots. And you almost don't need to use the brakes, but the problem is, again, there's so much thrust coming out of the back, even with it in idle, you're going to go about this fast forever. So he holds the stick full aft so that he keeps full weight on the main wheels, and then he gets on the brakes pretty firmly to make sure they're going to work. It handles ground effect just fine, it aero brakes well. There is one thing though, you need to be careful upon the aero brake because there's lift available still. In other words, the stabulator can generate enough downward pressure in the back of the airplane, and then the wings can produce enough lift so that you can actually scrape the afterburner on the ground, and you can also scrape the speed brakes. Many of us that transitioned from other airplanes where you aero braked with a full aft stick, we have all scraped the tail. You only do it once because it's really disconcerting when you first hear it and feel it, and then you walk around the back of the airplane and then the tail feathers are scraped and the speed brake scraped, and you have to spend the next day helping change the speed brake and pull the motor to change the tail feathers on the engine. Again, super simple to post-flight to be done with. You come in, you want to make sure that the airplane is stopped. You want to shut the INS and the GPS down. There's a couple other things you want to shut off, and you just turn the motor off and turn the battery off, and it's done. You could have the tug hook up with you in it and just push you back into the shelter, or it's real easy for you to get out and the crew chief to put it back in himself. That's actually his checklist. The checkerboard pages are his emergency pages. C-17 are flying with actually iPads on their knees. Modern airliners have in-flight publications built into the airplane. F-16 computer capacity doesn't have that, and really I don't need navigation charts. So I like having the book that I can carry with me, that if something's going wrong and I'm not sure what it is to fix it, I can look into the checklist. So I'm a checklist guy. Here you have a guy flying, it looks like about between 1,000 and 500 feet depending. He's going pretty fast. He looks like he's going someplace in the 400 to maybe even close to 500 knots. There he's up around 2,000 feet. But as far as enjoyment goes, it probably doesn't get much better than flying an F-16 low level in the mountains. This guy's having a good time just flying what I'd call a navigation low level, updating his navigation skills, making sure that he's able to fly low level, recognize terrain features, and navigate off the terrain features while using the capability of the airplane, both GPS and INS. Because it's one engine, you always want to make sure that you have enough kinetic energy, that is speed, so that if that motor decides not to work as well as it should, you're going to trade that forward airspeed for altitude, enables you to have time to decide what you're going to do should the motor actually fail. In this environment that he's in, birds are a factor. As you know, a bird and a jet engine often don't get along. We've seen proof of that in the United States when an airliner was taken out. F-16, you remember the cross-section on the front of it. The biggest piece of cross-section on the front of the airplane is in fact the intake, and it's sucking a lot of air as it's going, especially this fast. So if there's anything in the air that's in front of the airplane, there's a good chance it's going through the motor. So as an astute F-16 guy, A7 guy as well, any single engine guy or gal, you're always conscious of how fast you're going, how much altitude you have, and where might be the best choice to go if you can't get there. Glide ratios aren't the greatest, so if you can't make it, you make sure you point the airplane to someplace. In the U.S., we say we just give it back to the taxpayers. The fact that you've got an airplane to fly for an hour and a half, and your job is to someday use that in harm's way, inflicting the will of your country on some other country. You have a personal responsibility to go out there with that airplane and make the best of the time so that you can improve your skills. Found the valley, as far as tactically goes, again, in the modern airspace, the modern battle space, they either need to be really high, really fast, or really, really low and away from small arms fire. What he's doing now is he could evade most surface-to-air radars by staying low, and absolutely, even if the surface-to-air radar found him, he would be able to hide in the valleys and cause an overshoot by the missile, or the missile would be confused between the airplane and the ground, especially if he used countermeasures. So low-level flying, some people say there's no reason for low-level anymore. Again, it's like the gun. The technology is not always going to work, and if you're not able to do things to defend yourself, like fly low-level, like fight air-to-air, close-in battle, you're not of value to your fighter community because you need to be able to have those skills. Low level, fast over water, the problem is your perception for altitude and speed goes away because there's no images. This is a good example. Watch the feature of the island coming up. Really doesn't look like it's approaching very fast. He's probably about 600 or 700 feet. Watch how fast the island goes by once it gets here. So boom, there's the speed, but now look, you have no perception of speed. So what ends up happening is as you get comfortable in a low level environment, you end up going lower and faster. Lower and faster is okay if you know you're lower and faster, but if you don't know you're lower and faster, one small error finds you smacked on the water. If that nose goes down 1 degree for 1 second, he's in the water. So where's his attention? It better be out the window, it better be on flying the airplane. Before you know it, you're only 100 feet off the water going 500 knots. And at that speed and altitude, you don't have time for anything to go wrong. If something does go wrong, the first thing you do is climb and trade your airspeed for altitude so that you can go up and, as we say, smoke a lucky and decide what it is you need to do to fix the airplane. Low and fast, all you're doing is navigating. If you have to use the radar or use the pod or the ground mapping radar or other systems, you don't have the time. So if you have to use those systems, you better climb a little bit or at least make sure you have some assistance. "300 feet over pretty rough seas. If the water was smooth and there were no waves, again, you have the illusion of not going fast because there's no reference to go over, so anything three-dimensional helps. And you can tell it's windy because it's bumpy. although the wing loading of the airplane is such that the ride, low altitude, even when it's what we call bumpy, isn't that bad. You strap yourself in and you're fine. Some red flags in the days when we fly a lot of low level, it could be very rough in the desert, especially in the afternoon sorties. But again, some airplanes are getting bounced around pretty bad. The F-16 is at the low end of the bounce around scale. Got a good view out the left side of the airplane, the nice wing and the cranked arrow design. There go the leading edge flaps. The airplane does that for you. It knows the airspeed you're at, it knows what you're asking for in lift, so it gives you the best it can, maximizing lift and drag and configuring your wing for you, just like a bird. Pilot was on the runway, he was passing through about 160, 170 knots. He said, "Hey airplane, let's go fly." The airplane said, "Well, I've got to change the configuration of my wing to be able to give you the lift you need, so why don't I just put the leading edge flaps down?" It does, and then you notice as it got faster, up they came. And here he is in a situation where he's slow. The leading edge flaps are giving him the lift that he is asking for. Should you have them or should you not? Well, there's those that say they give away energy when they're down. Well, if you don't have an engine, that's true, they would. But if you have an engine that can overcome that, like the F-16 does, I want them there, and I don't want to have to control them. I want the lift and the turn radius / rate that I'm looking for based on my power setting. So if I can eliminate a control that I have to put in, and just by pulling back on the stick at whatever airspeed I'm at, the airplane's going to do its best for me. I am totally not paying attention to the position of the leading edge flaps while I'm flying. So air refueling used to get the airplane from one place to another to employ. Today, in fact, the United Arab Emirates has deployed to Italy. When they left the UAE, they had to hit tankers. Hit tankers is the expression. In the F-16, we use the boom, and the reason we use the boom in the U.S. Air Force because the boom can pass gas faster. If I take a 4-ship of F-16s and there's a 4-ship of Mirage 2000s, I'm going to be refueled and gone, and they're going to be on their second guy. Because number one, it's harder to get a contact, and number two, I can pass gas way faster. The KC-135 can't do both at once. Now, he can hang a basket off the end of his boom, but then with the basket on the boom, he can only do probe and drove airplanes. And modern airplanes like the KC-10 and the Airbus A330 and the new tanker that the U.S. is getting can do both. They hang drogues off the wingtips, and they have the boom in the middle, so you can do both, which is useful. Missions in Afghanistan that I flew a lot of, we'd take off from Kuwait. We'd fly down the Arabian Gulf, some call it the Persian Gulf. Usually by the time you just pass the UAE, you'd start looking for a tanker. And what the tanker does is he flies in a box in the sky. It's usually about 50 miles long, about 30 miles wide, and there's usually about 3,000 to 5,000 feet that he is. So it's literally a box in the sky. You know where that box in the sky is. If you're not using data link, the tanker has an air-to-air TACAN that's in the air tasking order or airspace coordination order. You dial up that TACAN. If you find him on the radar and you have a contact at 30 miles and your DME says 30 miles, then obviously that contacts the tanker, so that way you don't have to use any other identification modes. The way to rejoin with the tanker, there's multiple ways. If you're in an F-16, you like to do a fighter turn on because it doesn't matter where the tanker is, you just turn on him. If you're in a little bigger airplane, or you're late for your mission, you're late for your TOT, and you get there, you direct the tanker what to do. What I would usually normally like to do is not have to turn around on the tanker, so I try to time it so the tanker is just turning back in the direction that I have to go. And then about 20 miles prior to him and I, when we're 180 aspect, in other words, nose to nose, I'll say, begin your turn. The tanker starts turning, and I just drive straight ahead, and the tanker basically rolls out in front of me. And then the 50, now 35 or 6 miles we fly, I try to get all four of us refueled in that 30 to 46 miles, and I leave the end of the box on the other side. And that's the most efficient way. If there's a lot of people that are having to use that tanker, it's good to try to be efficient with it. When we would come out of Afghanistan, you were fighting, you were dropping bombs, you were supporting the ground force, you took your gas to the lower limit. In that situation, I wouldn't fill up. I'd get enough gas to make me comfortable, get my wingman on, get him up to speed so that you don't run him out of gas while you're getting gas. And you're just getting the tanker into this view. You can see his display. He's setting up to refuel. That tanker could give gas to a C-17, to a C-5, to a B-52, to a B-2. So those airplanes need to take gas faster, so we use a boom. And what the boom is, it's actually a flying probe or a port off the back of the airplane. In this airplane, that's a KC-135, there's a person laying down in the back of the airplane actually flying the boom into the back of your airplane. In the F-16, the refueling port is behind the pilot, so you pull up, and normally you're really happy to get there because you're getting low on gas. When I take a flight to the tanker, usually a flight of 4, I'll put 1 and 2 on the left wing and 3 and 4 on the right wing, and then I will direct who goes to the boom first. Oftentimes what you do is you do a squirt check first, and a squirt check is where everybody just goes up to the boom and makes sure that they in fact can take gas, especially if you're getting critical, and that the tanker can give gas. Really, you only take 100 pounds or so. Now you've confirmed everybody has gas. If nobody's critical still, then you just refuel in order. It makes it easy. And you always want number 1 to have less gas than number 4, because number 4's throttle technique is such that he has to push the far forward, push the far back. So it's all technique. Once you learn it and you get good at it, you're not going to forget how to do it. Do you get a little nervous if you haven't done it while driving up? Sure you do. Because you go, oh boy, that's a big airplane, you're driving up. But once you see the boom come down and you see him push out the refueling probe and you catch the yellow line on the bottom of the airplane, you get up there, you're fine. You just drive up and you see that it's going to work. Kind of get level with the boom, and then the boomer will move the boom to one side or the other. So there it goes by on his right side. It's going down the right side of the canopy. And then you're looking up at the bottom of the tanker, and it has markings on it. In this case, there's a yellow line, so get yourself on the yellow line. And then there's forward, aft, up, down lights. Just go to the green light, forward, aft, and you go to green light, up, down. And there are visual references on the airplane itself. But in today's tanker world, there's Airbus A330s, there are KC-135 various configurations, there's KC-10s. So just use the lights. You know, if you know you're going to have a KC-135 like this looks like an R model, if you follow the lights, you follow the yellow line on the bottom of the tanker, you'll always be fine. When you first learn to refuel, it takes you probably about 3 or 4 minutes to get comfortable with being so close to another airplane, especially such a big airplane. There he goes. He's getting close. Boom, he's hooked. So there he is getting gas. Airplane's hooked up. You can see the boom's grabbed hold of the middle of the back of his airplane. The refueling door's open. A little disconnect. What's happening here is the boom actually has a very long telescoping portion of it, but if you get to the point where the telescope is all the way in, the boomer does not like that and he'll break away quickly. You can see the telescope coming out there. The boomer likes to protect his boom, and rightfully so, because if that guy breaks that boom, his buddy's not getting gas, and if his buddy needs gas and the boom breaks, that's bad. You're going to land someplace you probably hadn't intended to. Again, good view of the tanker. So he needs to go there and lock into position. There he is. He's trying to get a contact. get on, you get plugged. The boom actually reaches out and grabs your airplane on your refueling port. So when it grabs hold, you kind of feel it, and it's pretty easy to stay in position because the boom actually does try to hold you in position. Now you can break away if you want to. You won't break anything, but you just try to stay there in position. You talk to him because it opens up an intercom. While you're out fighting and dropping bombs and doing all that stuff, you really don't have time to keep track of the weather at home, the weather en route to home, all that stuff. So you get on the tanker, hey, co-pilot, pilot, can you get me the weather at Aviano, or can you get me the weather at Ahmed El Jaber or Qatar or whatever, and they can call up their radios quick, and they do that and say, here you go. It's bad news, you take more gas. So he's full of gas and he's back off on whatever training mission he wants to go do. So air-to-air refueling just adds tremendous capability. In fact, the tanker force around the world is really what enables fighters like the F-16 and others to be as capable as they are. Flaps come up by themselves, so if you're a conventional airplane driver, you're always looking for the flaps. I started my life with 2,000 hours in T-38, so gear flaps was a habit. Still to this day, even with 3,000+ hours in the F-16, I'm a gear flaps guy. And every time I raise the gear, I just tell it thank you, because it does it for you. Usually like to climb out about 300, 350. There's profiles that take you to the 400, 410 range to save energy. Just limitless, incredible maneuverability of the airplane. Gauge on the left is a conventional AOA gauge. That's required on airplanes. That is the exact same angle of attack gauge that's on an F4 and that's on a T-38. Ergonomically, the airplane's a dream to fly. When they were designing the F-22, you had the stick in the middle community, and those guys that have never flown a side stick controlled airplane thought a stick should be in the middle for all kinds of silly reasons. Get it out of the middle of the airplane, get it over on the side, and that's where it is now. That's where it is in the F-22. That's where it is in Airbuses. So again, the F-16 and the folks that designed it were way ahead of their time, ergonomically, human factors wise. It's just a dream come true. Air-to-air intercepts, how do you find them? Well, you can either have off-board assistance, in other words, ground control intercept, or an AWACS that says, hey, you have traffic in your nose 40 miles, 10 left, 10 high, whatever, or give you the altitude. Or you can use your onboard sensors. In this case, it would be a radar, and your radar is good out to about, depending on the machine, 40 to 60, maybe even sometimes 80 miles if it's big enough. You never want to just use one sensor to isolate it. So in this case, he's probably got them locked. Now you can see he sees his contrail, he's visual, and he wants to do an intercept. Contrails, just condensation. Tactical consideration, if you're on an ingress into a bad guy land or you're fighting somebody, you really don't want to be conning. That'll help the other person see. So he's used his radar. Various modes give you a clue. You'll get a steering bar in the HUD, so you can just put the steering bar on him and that'll help you see him. The HUD will also display weapons parameters. In this case, it's a training mission, so he does not have live weapons on him. But the magic of the F-16 is you can put it into what's called the simulation mode, and the computers are so smart they can simulate the weapons and the parameters by which you'd shoot, and they can even tell you based on algorithms whether it would have been a good shot or not. Modern airplanes have cartridges on them that record everything. Literally everything, and you go back, the cartridge from one airplane and the cartridge from the other, you put it in the machine, and the machine syncs them up and replays it, and you can recreate the battle to include views out of the HUD if you want, so you can see your altitude, your range of the shot, the aspect of the shot, and you can debrief to everything, and that's of great value because you want feedback as to how well you did that, how well you ran the intercept, how well you were in weapon parameters, when you shot, what the characteristics are of the enemy airplane or the simulated airplane, your airplane during the shot, the parameters, etc. So you want to analyze all that so that if you ever have to do it for real, you're going to do it right. They're doing basically high altitude intercepts here. It looks like they're upwards of 25, 30,000 feet. You know, you take a good F-16 guy versus a good F-16 guy, and it's going to be 50-50 on who wins. And yes, you keep score and who shoots who and all that, but the real purpose is to get better so that when you ever have to do it for real, that you do in fact win. If you're a fighter pilot and you know the history of the airplane, like the F-4, whether it should have a gun or shouldn't have a gun was a huge debate. The bottom line is the gun is on the airplane for two reasons. It's air-to-air combat, and it's air-to-surface as well. The air-to-air combat environment will always be changing with advanced technology and advanced weaponry. No matter what happens, a fighter pilot needs to be able to knife fight, have a good skill set of basic fighter maneuvers, because if those long-range air-to-air missiles or those short-range air-to-air missiles or something doesn't happen, you're going to find yourself canopy to canopy with the guy that's trying to kill you, and you need to know how to use that gun. So I personally believe that every fighter in the world should have a gun on it. The gun you're looking at is a 20 millimeter Gatling gun. It shoots about 6,000 rounds a minute, very fast. The F-16, because of its small size, only carries 500 rounds, but if I can get 10 rounds on another airplane, I'm good. Very capable weapon, and it's a function of the bullet. Bullet technology is important in the airplane business, both for air-to-air and air-to-ground. That is the speed at which the bullet travels, its long-range performance, or what happens to the bullet after it leaves the airplane. You don't want it to tumble. You'd like it to stay true to its trajectory, etc. Bullet technology today is very good. Can't talk about some of it, but the bottom line is the gun is lethal, both air-to-air and air-to-ground. I personally have used the gun a lot in various conflicts around the world, and it is very good for, we call it reconnaissance by fire. So for example, if I have a suspected target on the ground, I can roll in on a high altitude strafe, maybe put a few rounds out, and if then they come back and shoot back, then I know that there's a good chance there's enemy down there. Or if I can just fly by and they shoot at me, I can come back around, or I can have my wingmen roll in with the gun and put about 100 to 200 rounds on the place where that fire came out. We used that tactic in Yugoslavia a lot. Just fly by and the wingman's about 5 miles behind you. He spots it, rolls in with his gun, and suppresses it. So the gun on a fighter is an essential piece, because all of us know that the air-to-air battle will constantly change based on technology. When all the technology fails, you need to be able to look the guy in the face, pull the trigger, and beat him in an air-to-air fight. So what he's doing now is what we call pull lead on him. In other words, he's flying a smaller circle than the guy that's in front of him. You've got a lot of information displayed in a very useful manner. Without taking your eyes off of the battle, you can get instant situational awareness of what you're doing. Say you had to change your squawk, or you had to change your steer point, or you had to change your VHF frequency. You can validate that without taking your eyes off. You can choose whether it's there or not if you like it. If you want to have it there, you can take it down. In the nav mode, there's no other information that you need. You don't have to look anyplace else. And what happens when you fly the airplane, you're looking through it, and you just have the information. It's displayed in such a manner, you and the airplane become one, and you just know the parameters just by sitting in it. He has the altitude low warning set at 1,400 feet. So with the radar altimeter on, when he gets to 1,399 feet, he'll get a low warning. Most of our weather limits are 300 feet in a mile. And now there are airplanes out there like the Block 60, and they can fly all the way down to 0-0. And it flies the approach for you. All you got to do is keep it on speed. So So here's a nice straight-in landing. The gear's down because you see the flight path marker right here. So you put the flight path marker, and no kidding, that's where the airplane would hit the ground if you left it there. This is the AOA bracket. Showing the radar altimeter is blinking because he's below his 1,400 feet. We're going 150 or so. What he really wants is he wants the flight path marker on the end of the runway, and you want to just be riding just on top of the AOA bracket. And then when you land, you want the AOA bracket in the middle. So he's got the steer point set at the middle of the runway. Good on him. Distance to the steer point is right there. Now he's got the flight path marker on the steer point. The steer point is the end of the runway. He's got it at about 2.5, 3 degrees nose low, so he's in pretty good shape. A whole little extra airspeed, no reason in the world not to do that. You got a long runway, why put yourself at risk? He's driving down, he's in good shape. The airplane is helping him fly. It looks like it's moving around a lot, that's just wind. He's probably not moving the stick much. It's probably perfectly trimmed. You could almost let go of the stick. He's just adjusting the power to keep the AOA right on. And again, there's no reason flying slow. It looks like it's a relatively long runway. You can see it appearing. Nice approach, 2.5, 3 degrees nose low. In actuality, when you see the airplane on final, it's probably about 11 degrees nose high, but the flight path it's flying is 2.5 degrees down. So the airplane is flying down at a nose high attitude, ready to land. If you've flown a lot of airplanes, the F-16, it's the first time you landed, it's easy because, as you can see, all the information was available to you, and it basically lands for you. All you got to do is hold the picture. Flybys are good and bad for lots of reasons. You get a bunch of young guys overzealous, and there's a potential for a flyby to be too low, too fast, shining your rear end, that sort of thing. But properly done, and most of our aviators today in modern air forces are very professional, and it's a moment of pride to be selected to go do a flyby, say at the Super Bowl, or I got to do football games, and everybody likes to do it. And the way it's done is actually good training because you have a time and you have a target by which you need to overfly. In the U.S., the target is usually the last note of the national anthem at a football game, and it's field center. So you're working the whole process to make sure you're in fact there at the right speed, at the right altitude, at the right time. Say you have a live version of the national anthem, somebody's singing it, it's Celine Dion or somebody, and she's going out of control and holds a note longer, you need to adjust real time. So it's done a lot of different ways, but usually you have a pilot, or oftentimes you'll have a ground controller, a JTAC, Joint Terminal Attack Controller, or a combat controller on the ground. And you're actually doing it like an actual mission. You'll hold that initial point, and then you use 15 or 10 mile legs, so you're holding, and you know how long it takes you to turn 100 degrees inbound. There's a flyby of a football stadium. There you go. That's nice. You have what's called show center, and you need to make sure you're not going too fast or too slow. You can't obviously go supersonic because you'll break things. And if you're going too slow, it's just, it's a yawner. So you usually try to be about 350 to 400 knots as you go by, so good jet noise. You don't want to light the afterburner because it's too noisy. Flybys are great feeling. And then normally in the U.S., if it's a football game, you go back and you're honored at halftime, and it's a pretty neat deal. The other situation you have, for example, if you're doing a flyby at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, Michigan, well, you're only 45 miles from Detroit Metro, you're only 15 miles from Willow One, you actually overfly Ann Arbor Municipal Airport, so it's an airspace nightmare, so you have to have the clearances, and you need to make sure that your airplanes are all clearing for civil traffic, especially in what I call semi-rural near big cities. Chicago is the other place that's really, really difficult because you have so many airfields around. If you're flying in civil airspace anywhere in the world, it's congested, and you're in absolute control of the air traffic controllers. There's a rule around the world, ICAO standard, below 10,000 feet, you have to fly 250 knots. There are fighters that have a waiver to that because of safety. An F-16, a T-38, F-5 at 250 is unsafe. So we fly at 300 knots. So if a controller's not used to controlling fighters, you're going a mile a minute faster than he's used to. So if he doesn't realize you're a fighter or a group of fighters coming in, it can mess him up. But we're very maneuverable. We're very willing to say, I see the traffic 12 o'clock, I'll follow it. Or I see the traffic here, let me go around behind it. Whereas an airliner, they don't have that ability. F-16 was a Cold War airplane to counter the MiG-21, basically, which is a great airplane. MiG-21 still flies today in many places. So the concept was let's get something cheap that we can build a lot of that's reliable. They did that. They advanced the technology from airframe design, stability, maneuverability, single engine thrust to weight. And still today, the airplane is a leading-edge airplane. It's been upgraded by many countries in many different variants. The newest, most modern upgrade program is the UAE's United Arab Emirates Block 60 airplane, a spectacular airplane. The future of the F-16, I think, is long. I'm not sure about production of new airplanes, which is really too bad because the airframe and the engine and the reliability and all we've learned about maintaining it make it a viable airplane. There was a big discussion, F-16 Block 60 type airplane versus the Joint Strike Fighter. That discussion has ended, but there are still those, and I'm one of them, an F-16, now retired guy, but an F-16 guy that says, why do I need more than an F-16? Why don't I build a Block 80, use the same airframe? So I believe the F-16 is going to be around for at least 20 more years. We're going to keep them flying. We're actually, although we're using them in conflicts around the world, multiple countries are, we're not flying them as hard anymore because we don't fly them low level as much. So the life expectancy is increased. The reliability, the part supplies are still good. And the other thing that the F-16 has done is enabled many pilots from around the world to be the same. You're an F-16 guy. There's literally thousands and thousands of F-16 pilots around the world, and we're all the same. We've all been flying the same airplane, and we all have the same passion for it. probably one of the most successful programs on the flying side ever in the history of airplanes, with numbers and safety of flight and capabilities. So overall, I think people that built it should be happy with it. Lockheed's happy with it. I'm kind of hoping we'll see another order by somebody of a Block 60-like version. Keep the assembly line running for a little while longer.